Governor, you've done a bunch of state budgets. Tom Emmer, the last couple of days, has been talking about that state employees, government employees make 30 to 40% more than public employees, even when you take out the benefits. Has that been your experience?
Well, the studies, I think, are very clear on this, including a recent USA Today story as well as other studies. It used to be that government employees were over-benefited and underpaid. People would say, yes, I'll serve in government employment because even though the salary isn't as good, the benefits are better. And now the studies are pretty consistently showing that relative to their private sector counterparts, public employees are often over-benefited and overpaid. And that's not a matter of political rhetoric. I mean, it's been documented. I would commend to you, as one example, the USA Today cover story from just a few weeks ago is a very dramatic example that underscores that point. On the budget more broadly, you know, I know everybody's talking about this so-called large budget deficit, but if you actually look at the math, there's no deficit at all if the state simply spends what it's spending now and lives within the revenues that are coming in. And so that's why we had this proposal last year to have as the budget balancing benchmark the amount of money that we're taking in the current budget cycle. But instead, what we have is a system that on autopilot projects a bunch of increased spending and then declares a deficit. So it is, in my view, largely an accounting fiction, and it should be fixed. We have a really distorted definition of what's a balanced budget. So, for example, the real math here is in the current biennium, we're going to spend in state dollars around $30 billion. We can get you the exact numbers. And in the next biennium, the revenues from that benchmark are projected to increase 7%. And so if the state can live within, almost 8% actually, state can live within an 8% increase in revenues, which should easily be able to do, there would be no budget deficit if that were the benchmark. Even if you include the federal money, the spending then for the state and the federal money that came in was about $32.8 billion. But this forecast that we're benchmarking it against says, well, you're not going to spend 32.8, you're going to spend 38, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's a ridiculous assumption. It's a 17% increase over the current biennium just because some bureaucratic projection deems that we're going to have automatic increases in spending. So that's the $5 billion deficit. If you simply continue the unallotments that we have had in effect for a year and a half or nearly 2 years now, which they're going to do anyhow, it's obvious, that gets the deficit down to about $2 billion. And then the rest of that increase between what I just described up to $38 billion is mostly Health and Human Services increases and LGA increases. And so you can eliminate most of that simply by dialing those back to something closer to what we're spending now. And so this isn't that hard even to solve. I mean, it's a relatively, in my view, relatively easy challenge.
Does that include commitments we've already made, such as Job Z, or would that remove those out of the budget?
That's all, I don't want to say inconsequential financially, but if you look at the amount of money involved there, it's not a game changer. The big money in terms of the difference between what the state is spending in this biennium and that $38 billion autopilot bureaucratic forecast that sets the benchmark for the alleged deficit is the increases are the assumption that the unallotments will expire and all that spending will snap back instantly, which they're not going to. All the candidates are talking about continuing them to some degree. And the other big increase areas are in $1.6 billion or so in Health and Human Service increases and LGA increases compared to current spending. And it's preposterous. I mean, the economy is flat. People's wages are flat. I mean, the notion that some mindless bureaucratic system just says we're going to have a $5 billion uptick in spending is preposterous. And that system needs to be changed. And that's why we got back to that budget balancing proposal that said the new definition, that we said that the budgeting process should be reformed, and that the new definition is going to be you can't spend in the next biennium as a starting point more than the revenues that you took in the current biennium. That proposal didn't even get a hearing in the Democrat-controlled legislature, or much of a hearing, I should say.